Hey, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Here's a question for you. How would you like to change people? Is that even possible? Today, I'm going to give you the definitive answer of yes to the second question. Welcome to another live episode. Today, I'm going to give you the definitive answer. Hold on, everybody. I've got a background problem going on here. Hold on, everybody. I've got a background problem going on here. We should have it solved now. Hold on, everybody. I've got a background problem going on here. This is what happens. I don't know where my background problem is, but I'm going to find it. Problem is. Clearly, I have it. I'm going to find it. I don't know where my background problem is. Clearly, I have it. I'm going to find it. I have solved it. Hey, we're going to actually start over. Howie's back in the waiting room laughing at me. I have done this so many times. Never had that happen before. I'm going to start over and welcome you all to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Let me ask you those very interesting questions that I asked a second ago again, right? Would you like to change people? I mean, seriously, would you like to change people? And is it even possible? I mean, the answer to the first question is yes, but I'm going to tell you definitively the answer to the second question today can be yes. And my guest is going to help us think about that. I'm so glad that you're here for another episode live of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. While you're here with us live, I hope that you will imagine that you're joining me and my guest, who will be joining us in a second, like we're all having a cup of coffee. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got ideas, I want you to share them. If you want to say hello and tell us where you're located, we want to hear that too. So please do all of those. And trust me that your comments, questions, and ideas will make for a better conversation today live and a far better conversation for all of those who join us later. And you can get all future live episodes and therefore interact with us. If you're listening to this on the podcast, if you join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, you can join us live just like others are right now. And you can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook and remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. I hope you'll do that. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month, we release a new skill in an advanced masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill and to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to bring him in. Howie's out there like, oh, Kevin, what did I get myself into here? With Kevin having a window open that was playing what I was saying with the slight delay. Howie Jacobson is our guest today. I'm glad to have him. Let me introduce him, and then we will dive in. Howie Jacobson, Dr. Howie Jacobson is an executive coach to clients ranging from startup founders to established and rising Fortune 100 leaders. He is the director of coaching at Bregman Partners and the head coach at the Healthy Minds Initiative. Howie is the author of AdWords for Dummies, co-author of Sick to Fit and Use Weight to Lose the Weight, as a contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition, and The Low Carb Fraud, both with T. Colin Campbell, as well as Proteinaholic with Garth Davis, MD. His writings have appeared in Fast Company and the Harvard Business Review. He hosts the Plant Yourself podcast, where he interviews remarkable people engaged in healing at the individual, institutional, and planetary level. He earned his MPH and a PhD in health studies from Temple and his BA at Princeton. He lives in rural North Carolina with his wife and with Peter Bregman. You're saying all of that stuff, Kevin, doesn't sound like what you normally talk about here. He has also co-written a brand new book with Peter Bregman. We'll talk about Peter in a second. The book is called You Can Change Other People. See, I told you. The 4 steps to help your colleagues, employees, and even family up their game. That's why we're here. Howie, welcome. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to say, in my own defense, I was not laughing at you exactly. I was more thinking, thank goodness it wasn't me this time.
Well, I as soon as I heard it, I knew what it was, but I couldn't find it. And thankfully, for those of you that are listening to the podcast later, you won't know what all that was because Marissa will edit out all that beginning and go to my new starting point. But some of you hung out through that or are listening to it, here on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and you're like, "What the heck?" That's what it was. We all make mistakes, and hopefully we learn to get through them. So we were planning to do this, Howie, a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago even. And we had some technical challenges on our end. And Peter was with us, your co-author and business partner. And he's not with us today because of a death in his family. So we will miss him, but I'm excited to have you here and for us to chat. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to take credit for all of his ideas today.
What a beautiful thing. Whatever I can do to help, Howie. It's so funny. We did chat a couple of weeks ago for, I don't know, probably 10, 15 minutes. And then just briefly before we went live today, and you realized that we had interacted like 15 years ago or something, but we had both forgotten that. So I'm so glad that we get the chance to chat today. Tell us a little bit about your background is interesting. You did all this stuff in sort of the health area. You've written this book. So tell us a little bit about your journey that gets you to this place and time and even to this work.
Yeah, as I look back, I think the journey has always been trying to figure out how to get better at helping people make changes in their own best interests. So I was a school teacher for many years. I met Peter in 1999 and we started working together, and I learned from him all about the world of coaching and organizational development. And I began, adding that to my repertoire, and all while staying very interested in health. I had some, sort of health challenges of my own in my 30s, and got very interested in like, how can I, heal myself? And I discovered that it was a lot easier to know what to do than to do it. All right.
Well, we could just stop this right here. Like, we all can agree to that. All of you that are watching live, just say yes if you agree with that statement. Yeah. That's true. That puts us in a confounding spot as a coach sometimes, doesn't it?
Well, it does, because as a coach, but also as a boss, as a colleague, as a spouse, as a parent, as a friend, it's much easier to know what somebody else should do than to know what we should do, right? Like, I just look around and I go, oh, I could solve all these people's problems if they would just listen to me.
Come to the fount of the knowledge. Here I am. Here's the other thing. But there is also a lot of times where we know, we just don't do, right? So what led Howie to this book? What led you to really? We got to keep Peter in the loop. Sorry. What led you to write this book? And I'll hold it up while you answer.
Okay. Peter and I have worked together for a long time, and I've learned, say, 93.8% of what I know about coaching from Peter. And so, using his methodology for a long time. And I also, I'm also adjacently in the world of health, and I've been teaching health coaches how to do a better job. And, the methodology that comes from business very often is extremely applicable in other areas. It's just not that well known because, businesses pay a lot of money for the coaching services, for the methodologies, for the processes, and they don't always democratize and get out into the wild where they're needed. So, or people in the areas where they're needed don't think people in business know anything about that stuff, right? So like there's blame to go both ways, right? I think that's a really, really good point, for sure. So we've used the word coaching multiple times already, right?
And so, is this book You Can Change Other People? Is this a coaching book?
No. So in that, you remember the book. So I know you're a parent. So there was a book that was like real popular maybe 15, 20 years ago called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It was written.
Yeah, I didn't read it. My kids would say, but yes, I am.
It goes on the fiction section with all the other parenting books, right? But no, it was a wonderful book. And it was written by two psychologists, but it wasn't a book of psychology, right? So our book was written by two coaches, but it's not a book of coaching. It's a book that distills some of the insights and principles and practices and tactics and techniques and strategies from coaching and wants to democratize it to make it straightforward and simple enough that anyone can use it. Because like when you talked about like, I'm the font, like come listen to me, what I discovered is when I was trying to make changes, people would often try to be very helpful and tell me what to do. And it almost always backfired because I didn't, like, who are you to tell me what to do? Or Peter talks about, someone says to him, do you really want that third bowl of ice cream? And in truth, he really didn't want that third bowl of ice cream. But now that you've said it, by golly, he's going to eat that.
Right, I do. Watch me go get that third bowl of ice cream. Yeah, that's in the book, everybody. That's why I knew I liked Peter right there, because I am all in for the third bowl of ice cream. But, so it's not a coaching book, and yet it is a book about influence. It is a book about relationships. It is a book about trust, about a whole lot of stuff. And to your point, it is to help to democratize, if that's the right way to say it, some of these ideas that some people have been using. And so it's one of the things I love about the book. So the book has this very evocative title, right? You can change other people. And you guys write a line in the book that I have said many times in my life. I wish I knew who said it first. I'm going to now credit you guys moving forward. But people will say, well, people resist change, right? Do people resist change, Howie?
Well, I hope not, because, I'm 56 and last year I was 55 and that's a change. I'm not as fast as I used to be. I'm much kinder. I'm much more patient. At one point in my life, I was single. Now I'm married. At one point in my life, I didn't have kids. Now I have kids. At one point in my life, I didn't own a truck. Now I own a truck. Like, change is kind of the fabric of life. We make changes all the time. People take on new jobs, they move, they, resolve to learn a musical instrument or to become a better listener, a million things. We don't resist those changes so much as we resist when we feel like they're being foisted upon us, when someone is forcing us to change or insisting that we change. When it feels like it's out of our control, then our natural desire for autonomy kicks in and we can become recalcitrant.
Yeah, people don't. And what you said, what I often say, and I think you say it the exact same way in the book, people don't resist change. They resist being changed. Don't you try to make me change. Don't you try to not let me have that third bowl of ice cream because here I go, right? Kind of thing. So there's a couple of sets of fours in the book that I thought maybe we'd spend some time on. Sure. The subtitle of the book talks about 4 steps, and we'll get to the 4 steps. But before that, you talk about 4 powers. And I'd like to have you sort of unpack those a little bit, because I think they are powerful and they will help people get a sense of and get some direct value from our conversation. I mean, obviously you and I both want the same thing. We want people to enjoy our conversation and go buy the book. We both want both of those things to happen. And yet we want them to leave with some really, very powerful ideas that they can take and apply while they're waiting for their book to arrive. So what are the 4 powers? And I might ask you a couple follow-up questions.
Sure. And I love that you're asking about that, because it's so important before, you just get into like, what are the steps? What are the techniques to really understand why we're doing them? So I'd invite you, and for everyone who's listening, to think of someone in your life that you wish would change. So this has some valence to it.
This won't take long, Howie, to come up with a name, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll just give you another 7 or 8 minutes to think of something. Right. So when we think about the change we want them to make, very often it's very specific. I want this person to eat better. I want them to stop interrupting me. I want them to be more proactive in their accountability, whatever it is. And so I would say, like, what we really want is when we try to just focus on that thing, that's when we get resistance. So I want to suggest that we actually want to activate 4 powers in the person that we're hoping will change. And the first one is ownership, which goes directly to this idea of people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So who owns the change and who owns their life? So there's a continuum. There are people who feel like they have total initiative, that they're the agents of their lives. There's other people who feel very much victimized, and they don't have a lot of opportunities, don't have a lot of power, don't have a lot of choice. So in general, I would argue that it's better for everyone, for humans to feel like powerful agents rather than victims. So whatever the change is, if we can help someone gain more ownership over a particular area of their life, and maybe that is extensible to other areas of their life, so that the person becomes more in control of their own destiny. So that's the first power, is ownership.
If we don't feel we have ownership, we're not going to do anything, because we're just going to float in the breeze. Why would we do anything? Howie, it didn't matter, right?
Right.
You can't change the weather, right?
Yeah. And at work, if you don't have ownership, you do just enough to not get fired, right?
Yep. You will comply, right? But you're not going to be committed. So I think about, we got ownership, commitment, and accountability. We can hook them all together because they're directly connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if people don't feel that, don't have that sense of ownership, that sense of I can influence this and or control this, depending on what this is, makes all the difference, right? So one of the powers is ownership. We're totally in agreement. Number two.
Right. Number two is independent capability, which is to say that very often when instead of changing people, and this is for managers and the people that report to them and parents as well, that it can feel like, oh, actually going through the process of like getting them to be better is too much of a hassle. I'll just do it for them. And of course, when we step in, oh, you did, this spreadsheet wasn't right. This is how you should do it. Right. And we just do it for them. First of all, we're making ourselves the bottleneck for now and future. And second, we're depriving them of the opportunity to develop their own independent capability. Right. I saw a very funny, sad meme on Instagram yesterday. It shows a guy about my age sitting at a desk with a scowl, and it says, "This boomer would rather die than train you to do his job and retire." Right?
Yeah.
So, a generous way to be in the world is to help people develop their own capability, which is required. If I want someone to change and do something differently, they also need, in addition to ownership, they have to be able to do it. They need that capability. And so that's another power that we want to, enable and support in the people around us.
Yeah, go right ahead. The next one's a hard one, I think. And I think this next one, get your pens ready, everybody. The next one is emotional courage.
Yep. It's and Peter's last book, Leading with Emotional Courage, was all about this. And it's the idea that in the there's a moment. So I'll use a little graphic here for people who are watching the podcast. So my hands are together, the palms, the base of the palms touching. There's a moment where we either get to do an action that moves us towards what we want or away from what we want. And it's often in a moment. So the moment is, I have to choose, do I want the ice cream or not? Do I get up and go for my walk, or do I stay in bed and scroll Instagram? Do I speak up in this meeting and share something that's a little bit scary, but I think the team needs to hear? Or do I play it safe and sit quietly? And in that moment, the thing that is going to keep us from doing the toward thing, the thing that's going to get us what we want, to move us in the direction we want in life, is going to be a feeling. It's going to be an emotion. It could be a sensation. It could be a thought, something that if we do this, we're going to have to feel something that we'd rather not feel. And so ultimately, and I see this all the time in the work I do around health, where, we eat to eat our feelings very often. But it's also just as true in the corporate world, where there's this emotion that I don't want to feel, and by not acting, I get to not feel it, or by acting in an old default way. So if I'm feeling scared and vulnerable about a project, the way that might come out is anger, because anger is easier for me to feel than maybe shame that I've done something wrong, or fear about what's going to happen to me. So emotional courage is utterly critical in those moments where we have the opportunity to choose A or B.
And then the last of the powers is future proofing. Tell us about future proofing a little bit.
Yeah, it's an understanding that the world is not going to stand still for us, and that if I can do something once that doesn't mean that I'm always going to be able to do it as circumstances get harder. I can speak up in this meeting, but when the SVP is in the room, can I speak up at that meeting? Can I speak up when I'm live on LinkedIn with Kevin, right? When the stakes are higher still, when it's being recorded.
Well, I don't know that it's higher than with the SVP, but that's fine. But yeah, but I think you're exactly right. How do we? Well, I guess I'm sorry. Was there something else you want to say there?
Well, yeah, just that this idea of resilience, that we often think of behavior change in terms of motivation, right? Like I'm really motivated to get up today and eat really well and exercise. And then the day comes and goes and we haven't done it. And then we say, well, I guess I wasn't motivated, but it really is about follow through, not motivation. And so future proofing is really helping people follow through ongoing, even when things get hard, especially when things get hard, in the same way that any athlete, let's say someone who's trying to get stronger, continually lifts heavier and heavier weights to challenge themselves, and expect that whatever change you're going to make, the universe is going to keep challenging you to help you get better and better at it. And you're not always going to succeed, but future proofing means you're always looking for what's the next challenge likely to be, and how do I prepare for that as well?
So when we are partnering with an ally with someone, in the title of the book, you say colleagues, employees, or even our family. What we want to try to do is help activate these 4 things in others, correct?
Right. And activate them, and just as importantly, not squash them, which is, if you think about the ways we typically go about trying to change people, by criticizing them, by giving them unsolicited advice, by trying to pump them up, by reminding them how great it'll be if they change, that all of these things actually erode or undermine ownership, independent capability, emotional courage, and future proofing. So the first thing we want to do is not deflate them where they exist, and then more skillfully try to build them up.
You said something in almost each, I think probably in all 4 of the powers, that when we tie them back together, make a really important point. And that is, oftentimes people, I know how it's not a coaching book, but if I'm a coach, as a boss, as a leader, and you said it earlier, that one of the things that we do to rob people of independent capability is, hey, let me just do that for you. Let me just help you. And I think that one of the things I love about the 4 powers is it helps remind us that this isn't about us. It's all about the other person, right? It needs to be all about the other person. And in every one of those is, you talked about things that we might do that unintentionally squash, deflate, take away from one or more of those powers. Thoughts, comments about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That if and think about it from the other person's perspective. Like if that person thinks, oh, you're trying to get me to eat differently, or you're trying to get me to manage differently, then there's that resistance. But if you're trying to help me gain more ownership, if you're trying to help me increase my capability, if you're trying to help me increase my resilience and my courage, then I want all of that.
Right. So if I as the person being coached, I'll just use as the coachee, feels that the intention of the other person, of the coach, is in my best interest, and they really are in this for me, then I'm much more likely to be in. I'm not being forced. I'm not going to resist the change. Less likely to resist the change, right?
Right, which goes directly into how we set up the 4 steps.
So I'm looking at our time, and we're zooming right along here in our time, but I do want you to hear, we probably can't unpack the 4 steps like we'd like to. I am talking with Howie Jacobson, the co-author of this wonderful book, You Can Change Other People. And we're talking about what some of those things are as it relates to better understanding and supporting and activating the things in the other person. But then there are 4 steps that the subtitle of the book mentions. So let's talk about those briefly, Howie, because I've got a couple other very specific things I want to ask you before we finish.
Okay, great. I thought we had 3 hours today, no?
I would love to have 3 hours, but I do not think that my calendar, your calendar, nor the people with us would necessarily want that.
Okay, fine. So the first step is to shift from critic to ally. And really that's a requirement, because as we've seen, if someone feels that you're a critic, that you know more than they do, then they will resist. And so to shift from critic to ally really means first empathizing with whatever the other person is going through. Really first of all, getting clear on like, what do I want in this situation? And if I'm having frustrations or negative emotions or upset, then just like I talked about with anger is covering up fear, that there's always some positive behind any negative emotion. Like there's always like, I want our team to succeed, or I want this person to be well, this family member who's mistreating their body. I want them to be healthy and live a long time. I love them, right? But we can lose touch with those tender positive emotions when we cover them up. So get in touch with that. Empathize with ourselves, empathize with what the other person might be trying to do. That person who's always interrupting in meetings and driving everybody crazy. Well, what's a possible positive intent behind what they're trying to do? And we don't have to get it right, but just thinking more generously allows us to approach in a way that makes us appear to be an ally, and so can invite conversation.
And and this is one of the many things I love about this book, is this idea of finding positive intent. And I have long been a proponent to say, hey, why don't we look for what the positive, at a minimum, the benign intent of the other person is when we don't understand what's going on. But the thing that I love in the book is you also talk about finding it for ourselves as well. And I think that's so very powerful. So that's all about this piece of becoming an ally, being seen by the other person, right, as being an ally, ultimately. And what are the next three, or the other three steps?
So the second step is to identify an energizing outcome. And this can be their energizing outcome or your shared energizing outcome. But because, it's beautiful, because like, okay, they're now accepting you tentatively as an ally because you've been empathetic and you've come across and you've gotten permission to have the conversation. Now let's demonstrate it. And the best way to demonstrate being an ally is to say to them, well, what do you want? Right? Instead of them fearing like, I'm going to impose my agenda on them. What do you want in this situation? Or what would be great for you? What's an outcome that would be really exciting? And that does a couple of things. First of all, it bolsters our bona fides as an actual ally, because we're curious about what they want. And it gets them from problem thinking to solution thinking, from past to future, from negative to positive. And we know from neuroscience that when our brains are focused on problems, we're basically in fight or flight. And our brains in fight or flight are simply looking to avoid problems, and they don't have the ability to discern opportunities.
Yep.
So by making that switch, we put their brain into a more creative, safer place where they can begin to look for ripe fruit instead of trying to avoid the footfalls of predators.
Perfect. Next is well, you've talked about opportunity now a little bit. You want to say any more about that third step?
Yeah, well, that's the third step, is once we have that energizing outcome, we can go back and look at the situation, the issue, the problem from the perspective within the frame of the outcome that they want. And we say, what's the opportunity here? How can we maybe use what we thought of as a total negative, a bummer, this problem, this brick wall? How can it actually become a doorway to getting what we actually want, to helping them get what they want, to achieve this outcome? So very often, just to give you a couple of examples, the person who is interrupting in meetings all the time, the outcome we want is actually a really high functioning team. And maybe the rest of the team are all, yes men and women who lack the courage and boldness to question. And this person has something that the whole team could use if we could, get this person to be more effective and generous and sensitive in how they express themselves. So the problem actually has a good side that can help us get to this opportunity.
Yeah. I'm going to wait till after you do the fourth step, and then I want to make an
Okay.
observation about all four. So go ahead. Step
Okay.
4. So we've got move from being a critic to an ally, create an energizing outcome, and help them look through the frame of of the change as an opportunity. And then the fourth step is?
The fourth step is to create what we call a level 10 plan. And so I guess here's where I'd have to cop to it being a coaching book, Kevin. So where you've got me in the half Nelson, and I admit that it is a coaching book, because coaches always end with the plan, right? What are you going to do?
Well, because there's got to be one, right?
Right. Otherwise we're just navel gazing. Right. So the plan is like every plan, who, what, where, when, how, specifics. What are you going to do by when? But we call it level 10 because we're not so interested in whether it's going to work. We want to we want to think about the plan that has the best chance of succeeding, but we're not hung up on that. Instead, we want a plan that the person is going to commit to following through on. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are they? We want them to say 10.
Yeah, you're hitting the things I wanted to come back to. You talk about this idea of the power of 10. That using that question. Okay, so now you've got a plan. How confident? Scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you that you can do this stuff? Like, that is a powerful question. Because if you get a 4, like if you ask me that question, Howie, and I give you a 4, what are you going to do next? Well, that's about a 4, Howie.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Well, let's talk about, we don't want to. Right. Because if it's a 4 and you don't do it, you're going to, what have we done? Well, you've just deprived yourself of independent capability. You're now less sure of yourself. You have less emotional courage for next time. You see yourself more as a failure. Right. So we accrete enough of those negative experiences. Oh, I didn't do it again. I'm too scared to do this. I'm not a morning person. I have a sugar habit. All these start to turn into reasons and excuses why not. So we want to make sure, if you come and say it's a 4, I'd say, great. That's awesome that you know that about yourself. Tell me what makes it a 4 and what could make it higher.
Exactly. Right. So notice, everybody, what he just did. He acknowledged that. He valued and remained my ally, even though in the back of his head he's going, we got to get this boy above a 4. That's not where he went, even though that's where we're going to go. The way how that you went about that's exact. I mean, it's right on. And I love that you just sort of did that so naturally, which just shows that all the rest of us, we can do that too. And we can let go of what we're thinking in the math. 4, holy smokes. I've been talking to this guy for 35 minutes. I've only got him to a 4. But my point is that, using that, because if we don't ask that question, we're going to get all those negative outcomes you just described. Right? If you say, oh, we got a plan. Kevin's got a plan. But we never ask Kevin what his confidence level is. How likely will he do it? Right? Gaining commitment to the plan. Another question I love to ask is, so, okay, now we have this plan. Can you see yourself doing this? Are you going to do it? Mm-hmm. Like, and confidence is a big part of that, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how big or how small the step is, because the way we define change is it's a discontinuity from the past. So the reason we don't change is we keep doing the same things. So now we have this new opportunity based on a new understanding of the outcome, based on a new framing of the problem. And we get to do a new action. And even if the new action is very, very small, right? Maybe it's not Everest, but maybe it's a foothill. And now I can see Everest, or maybe it's base camp. And now I'm prepared for the climb. So that any sort of change you make makes you a new person. And that new person has capabilities of which you are yet unaware.
And has built a confidence that, well, I did that. Maybe I can do the next thing too, right? I love that all so much. And I really love that power of 10 idea and the question that goes with it. Because if we don't ask that, or if you give me the pass when I say it's 4 or a 5, then I'm building a new habit that says, well, we can build a plan, but then nothing's ever going to really change. And there's a lot of leaders in this listening to me or listening to us right now that have maybe inherited a team member that has gotten bad reviews for several years and nothing's ever changed. And one of the reasons is because it isn't that the supervisor before didn't have a conversation with him. It's there was never anything after well, there's a plan, but there's nothing, another conversation until next year. And so that person has learned, well, all I got to do is get through the performance review. Right. And because nothing really is being expected to change. They're not really helping me. I'm not being given an expectation around it. I'm not really being given new capabilities about it. And so if we inherit that, that's where we've got to start with the stuff you've just been talking about to help people see this, that this is, I'm your ally to help you get there, right? There's a benefit to you to make this change.
Right. And that brings up something else I just want to mention, which is that you can look at this methodology and think, well, it kind of defangs leadership, right? Because I have to care about what they want and not what I want. And if they're not confident, then I don't have to hold them to it. But it's separate. They're two different things. You as a leader still have responsibilities for standards and for accountabilities. And what you don't have is the right to force someone to listen to you and change because you tell them to. So we have to keep those separate. If you say, you know what, I really don't want your help in thinking about this, Howie, I'll say, okay, great, that's fine. I still expect it on my desk by Monday morning. Right? You don't have to talk to me, but it doesn't mean that I'm now a pushover on everything. So and this stuff works much better in an environment of clear accountabilities.
100%. We don't really have time to dive into that like I would like to. I want to shift us to a couple of things I like to ask everybody that's here, Howie. And one of those is when you're not writing all those books that are behind you on the shelf, when you're not coaching folks in a whole variety of areas and doing all of the work that you do, what do you do for fun?
For fun, I am an aging ultimate Frisbee player. And I find
why do you have to put the word aging in there? Everyone on the planet is aging, Howie.
Because it's important. Because I play in a 50 and over league. The older I get, the better I get relative to the other people my age.
Nice. So I'm getting older, and I'm not maybe getting better, but I'm getting better compared to the competition. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I have a friend who's in her late 70s who now wins all her races because she just eats right. Like I'm just like improving by attrition.
So you play Ultimate Frisbee. How long have you played Ultimate Frisbee?
I've played Ultimate Frisbee since 1977.
That's like the onset of the sport.
Yeah, well, it was invented at my high school, Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey, in the late 60s, and so I was exposed to it pretty early, and I just fell in love with it. So something about throwing plastic must really appeal to me.
Apparently. So I have found two things to be true: that nearly everyone who writes is a reader, and certainly everyone I've ever met who by most measures of success are also readers. And so I have long asked this next question on this show, and I'm going to ask you, as I do everyone, really, what are you reading, Howie? Or what's something you've read recently? Yeah.
So I've got 3 books that I'm kind of going back and forth with right now, and they all have something very fundamental in common. They're all about indigenous knowledge systems. And I think it's very important to look at the culture we're enmeshed in from outside eyes, because there's so many assumptions we make. So one of them is a book called Sand Talk by an indigenous Australian professor, craft maker, and writer and philosopher named Tyson Yunkaporta. Another is a brand new book called The Dawn of Everything by a couple of renegade archaeologists, anthropologists, looking at sort of the history of humanity and what we can learn from the vast range of different societies we've created. And the message I'm taking away is nothing is ordained, it's all our choice. So if you talk about sort of independent capability and ownership on a global scale,
right?
Like, you don't like it this way, it's not because we had an agricultural revolution and industrial revolution, it's because we chose these things. And if we want to choose different things, we get to.
You have the third book handy?
The third book, I'm blanking on the title right now. It's by a Native American writer as a botanist. It's pretty famous, and I'm totally blanking on the title right now.
It's all good. If you think of it later, send, or when you think of it later, send it to me. We'll make sure we get it in the
I'm
podcast version.
I'm now surreptitiously checking my phone's Audible because I was just listening to it. I'm so embarrassed.
Well, normally
braiding. I got it. Braiding sweetgrass.
Great.
Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Smith. I think her last name is Kammerer. And Robin Wall Kimmerer. Sorry, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's her looking at the science of botany from a Native American perspective. And all these things, they just serve to make me question in a good way all of the assumptions that I hold about how things have to be.
I love that. Everybody, that's one of the reasons why I ask that question to everybody that joins me, because we get such thoughtful, we get more books to read or to consider, but we also get really thoughtful reasons why people have made the choices that they made. So Howie, thanks for sharing those 3 books and your sort of thinking behind it, as well as giving us some insights that you learned from them. I really appreciate that. How about the question you've been most wanting me to ask from the beginning? Like, if people want to be connected with you, if they want to learn more about this wonderful book, where do you want to point people?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask where they can see pictures of me playing Ultimate Frisbee, but all right. The second question is even better. So they should go to bregmanpartners.com. And right at the top, there is information about the book, about the company, about Peter. Remember Peter? Peter Bregman, whose methodology this is originally. And so, you know, hats off to him for developing it over 30 years and letting people like me use it and co-develop it with him. And you can get the book anywhere books are sold. I would love to encourage people, if you have a local independent bookshop, to get it there. But wherever you get your books online is cool.
All right. So now I have a question for all of you. Yes, you, not another one for Howie, but one for you as a viewer, whether it's live or later, or as a listener later. The question is, now what? What action are you going to take from this? What are you going to do differently? How are you going to think differently, perhaps? But what are you going to do differently the next time you're having an interaction with someone? Are you going to stop and say, am I squashing people's ownership? Am I helping them create emotional courage? What could I do if I wanted to create more emotional courage? How could I be seen more as an ally by those that I interact with, whether they're my colleagues, my employees, my family members, my neighbor, whatever, my Ultimate Frisbee teammates, whatever they might be. And so the challenge here is not just to say, well, this was interesting, this was useful. The challenge isn't even to just, hey, I'm going to go buy a copy of this great book. The challenge is, what action will I take as a result of being here? And Howie is going to say, well, Kevin sounds like a coach because he wants you to make a plan. And that's exactly what I want you to do. Howie, thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure. I'm glad we finally got the chance to make this happen. Even though we're doing it without Peter, I'm so glad we got the chance to do this.
Oh, me too. It's been wonderful meeting you, and you have such great, insightful questions and comments. So it's been a enriching experience for me too.
All right. Well, everybody, if you don't know, if this is your first time listening, let me tell you, we'll be back. But if you've been here before, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.